Join us on Patreon and become part of our journey to uncover history's untold stories. Your support helps us create in-depth content, bring hidden narratives to life, and keep history alive for everyone.
There is a quiet whisper carried on the winds of the Ethiopian highlands, passed down through the sacred chants of the Ethiopian Orthodox priests, echoed in the stone corridors of monolithic churches, and guarded in the hearts of the faithful. It is a belief older than most modern doctrines, preserved not in theory, but in sacred ritual and national identity. The belief is this, that the second coming of Jesus Christ will not manifest through the gates of Jerusalem, but through the sacred soil of Africa, specifically Ethiopia. To many in the West, this notion seems at odds with mainstream Christian eschatology. But to Ethiopians, this is not merely a theological theory. It is a truth steeped in prophecy, blood, history, and divine covenant. To understand the root of this belief, one must begin not with a modern Ethiopian church, but with the ancient covenant that stretches back to the time of Solomon and the Queen of Sheba. According to the Kebre Nagast, the sacred Guizi text held dear by Ethiopians, the Queen of Sheba, known in Ethiopian tradition as Makeda, journeyed to Jerusalem to meet King Solomon. What followed was not only a political alliance but a divine union. Makeda returned to Ethiopia bearing the child of Solomon, a son named Menelik I, who would become the first emperor of Ethiopia's Solomonic dynasty. This royal bloodline was not simply a matter of national pride. According to the Kebre Nagast, it was Menelik who, during a return visit to Jerusalem, brought back with him the Ark of the Covenant, either with or without Solomon's knowledge. The Ark, believed to house the presence of God himself, was thus relocated to Axum, where many Ethiopians believe it still resides today, housed in the Church of Miriam Sion and guarded by a single monk who is forbidden to leave its side. This relocation of the Ark was more than symbolic. To the Ethiopian faithful, it meant that God's dwelling place had shifted. The center of divine gravity had moved from Israel to Ethiopia. This idea, that Ethiopia holds within it a sacred legacy, one tied directly to the God of Israel, is repeated often in both Scripture and Apocrypha. Psalm 68 verse 31, a verse often quoted in Ethiopian liturgy reads, "Princes shall come out of Egypt. Ethiopia shall soon stretch out her hands unto God." To many Ethiopians, this is not poetic flourish but prophecy. The hands that stretch out are those of a waiting nation, one that has been preparing itself, through fasting, liturgy, and centuries of unwavering faith for the return of the Messiah. The belief that Jesus will return through Ethiopia finds further strength in the unique Christian tradition that has thrived in the nation since the 4th century CE. While Roman and Byzantine Christianity flourished under the might of empire, Ethiopian Christianity was born in seclusion, nurtured in mountainous hermitages, carved into rock-hewn sanctuaries like those of Lalibela. It was in this isolation that Ethiopia cultivated its own sacred rhythms, its own calendar, its own canon of scripture, and its own intimate, prophetic interpretation of Christian history. For Ethiopians, their church is not just another branch of global Christianity. It is a living ark, carrying forward the unbroken link between ancient Israel and the New Jerusalem. The Ethiopian Orthodox Tewahedo Church considers itself the rightful heir to the covenant of Israel, and many of its practices, from the keeping of kosher-style dietary laws to the observation of Old Testament festivals, reflect this deeply Hebraic identity. This fusion of Old and New covenant traditions fuels the belief that Ethiopia is not merely a footnote in biblical history. It is the hidden cornerstone of God's redemptive plan. A major theological root of this belief lies in the concept of Zion, which, in Ethiopian theology, is not solely tied to the physical hill in Jerusalem, but represents a spiritual place where God dwells among his chosen. With the ark believed to reside in Axum, that city has become, in the eyes of many Ethiopians, the new Zion. The shift is subtle but powerful. While most Christian traditions look to the rebuilding of the temple in Jerusalem as a sign of the end times, Ethiopians see the temple as already present, hidden in plain sight, in the stone churches of Ethiopia, in the rituals of the faithful, and in the unbroken lineage of Solomon through Menelik I. Moreover, the Ethiopian prophetic tradition holds that Africa, long considered the cradle of civilization, will also be the cradle of the final spiritual awakening. In this belief, Africa's suffering under slavery, colonization, and exploitation is viewed not as abandonment by God but as a refining fire, a crucible through which the soul of the continent is being prepared for a greater purpose. That purpose, some believe, is to receive Christ upon his return. In Ethiopian apocalyptic literature, such as in the lesser-known Book of the Mysteries of Heaven and Earth, Meshaf Guizi Elam Wisimi, one finds cryptic prophecies that speak of divine light returning to the land of the blacks, of a Messiah who comes not through Roman ships or Hebrew gates, but through the highlands and valleys of Ethiopia. These texts, though little known in the West, have been part of Ethiopian theological meditation for centuries, quietly shaping a worldview that sees Africa not as peripheral but as central to God's plan. Even outside Ethiopia, within the wider African diaspora, these ideas have found fertile ground. The Rastafarian movement, which emerged in Jamaica in the 20th century, is deeply influenced by Ethiopian messianism. Rastafarians see Haile Selassie I, the last emperor of Ethiopia and direct descendant of Solomon and Menelik, as a divine figure, some as the returned Christ himself, others as the forerunner. Selassie's coronation in 1930, during which he was given the titles King of Kings, Lord of Lords, Conquering Lion of the tribe of Judah, echoed the messianic titles found in Revelation. For many, this was no coincidence. His presence on the world stage signaled that Ethiopia still held the key to messianic destiny. And while Haile Selassie himself denied divinity, insisting that his faith lay in Jesus Christ, his connection to biblical lineage only solidified the Ethiopian belief that their nation was set apart. When Selassie addressed the League of Nations in 1936 after Mussolini's invasion, many interpreted his words as a prophetic lament, a call to the nations that was ignored, just as the voice of prophets were ignored in ancient times. Ethiopia, bloody but unbowed, stood as a symbol of endurance and divine preservation. The Ethiopian calendar itself, which differs from the Gregorian by about 7 to 8 years, reflects the nation's theological independence. In the Ethiopian reckoning of time, the age of the world is calculated differently, and this difference feeds into prophecies that suggest the rest of the world will only awaken to divine truth after Ethiopia's time has come full circle. Some interpretations even suggest that the return of Christ will occur during an Ethiopian Jubilee year, aligning divine time with Ethiopian time, not Roman, not Jewish. What makes Ethiopia's claim even more striking is its humility. Unlike nations that trumpet their importance through force or commerce, Ethiopia's spiritual claim is quiet, steady, and rooted in an ancient confidence. It is not a matter of conquest but of continuity. Ethiopia's mountains have watched centuries rise and fall. Its rivers have mirrored the stars longer than empires have existed. Through it all, the faith of its people has remained, largely untouched by Reformation, Vatican councils, or Enlightenment skepticism. Their Christianity is not a borrowed faith. It is a homegrown flame. In the end, Ethiopia's belief that Jesus will return through Africa is not a rejection of Jerusalem but a recentering of sacred geography. It is the belief that God's presence, once enshrined in a desert tabernacle, then in Solomon's temple, has journeyed through exile, diaspora, and devotion to the heart of Africa. For Ethiopians, Christ's return will not be an arrival from without, but revealing from within, a manifestation of a promise long nurtured, long hidden, and finally fulfilled in the land of ancient Zion, where faith has never been a foreign tongue.